the idea of other universes or parallel dimensions is possible. Not just science fiction, but you have real scientists out there speculating that it's quite possible that these things do indeed exist.
Yeah, there is a widening of hypotheses taking place, it seems, in the last for the most part, for the last 5 years and moving on forward, of the idea of ultra-terrestrials, not just a physical form traveling through the stars, but coming through the different dimensions. That was a pretty clever reference to Sliders. I wonder how many people actually remember that show, Sliders.
I do. I used to love that show.
I did too, actually.
Because it would appeal to two things. One, to me, the science fiction part of it, of course, but also the historical part of it, because it's that alternate history thing. I think they actually did have an episode where the world had turned into like a Nazi world.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah, it was good.
Yeah, it was that kind of idea. Okay, what would have happened if? And I think those are from the very days of the old Marvel comics when they had the what if. What if Dr. Doom had been good and Mr. Fantastic had been evil or something like that? That idea. Well, hey, let's look at alternate possibilities. And I think people are fascinated by that because it's like looking back in your own past. We all do it and say, you know what? You remember that girl that I dated? What if I had just
right? Maybe
things had turned out differently. And I think that's a staple of science fiction, but it might also be a staple of science fact.
Yeah.
That each time you make a major decision, I'm not sure that, deciding whether to get rye bread or white bread is going to change the course of the universe. But, the idea that there might be turning points. And specific people, maybe not all 6 billion of us, but maybe certain people at certain places at certain times make a decision that can change history and branch it off in one way or another. And maybe you could travel back in time, or maybe you do create different universes. I don't know. I mean, it's still science fiction. I just think it's moving slightly closer to potentially being science fact.
Right. I think the important keynote here is to point out that the doors are being kept open to the possibility and not being closed. That's the key.
It's mind-blowingly fascinating stuff. And if you have I love sports, but if I have the choice between sitting in a bar and nattering on about whether the Boston Celtics are going to win another NBA title, or the Red Sox win a World Series, which I do on occasion, or I can talk about, hey, what about the possibility that, there's this non-human intelligence out there interacting with us like this, I usually choose the latter these days as opposed to the former.
Cool. Yeah.
Well, I think as you get closer to the Grim Reaper, I'm probably a little closer than you are, you kind of start thinking, okay, what's the meaning of all this? And at the end of the day, I think that's really what it comes down to. Whether you're looking at ghosts or psychic phenomena or UFOs, extraterrestrial intelligences, whatever you want to call them, any of that stuff, I think it all comes down to the basic question, who are we? And are we alone? Whether, in a religious, spiritual sense or in a, hey, are we alone in the galaxy sense or whatever? Is there more than this? And I think at some point we all turn our minds to that question, even if we're not exactly aware that that's what we're doing. So I think when a lot of people look into UFOs or ghosts or any of this stuff, there's an underlying element. There certainly is with me, where you're trying to figure out what does, as the old film said, what's it all about, Alfie?
Yeah.
And, so what is it all about? And maybe there are clues to the bigger question of who we are and what it's all about lodged within these smaller, seemingly smaller things like ghosts or UFOs or something like that.
Yeah, definitely. And I mentioned earlier that the New Frontier Symposium that you put on in 2006 brought the late, great Mac Tonys, and he had a cool talk about our post-human future, I guess it would be.
Yes.
And I'm actually probably like 2 chapters away from finishing his posthumously produced The Crypto-Terrestrials. This being said about keeping these doors open of perception and possibility, what do you think about his theories and hypotheses about, these ETs maybe not being from outer space or extra dimensions at all, but being much closer to home?
Well, I preface any remarks by saying Mac was one of my 3 or 4 best friends on the planet.
Wow.
Oh, let's just say in the universe, because you never know. I might have friends on Zeta Reticuli that I don't know about yet. So his passing in October 2009 was a blow personally that I still haven't quite recovered from, because we were working on a whole host of projects together. And, he was just one of my best friends.
Yeah.
Having said that, I think his crypto-terrestrial hypothesis is baloney. And I told him so. And he knew. We had conversations back and forth. He didn't believe it either. He didn't disbelieve it. But to him, it was just a thought experiment. He'd said, I'll look at the evidence, and let me conjecture, what about this possibility? And there are roots within the crypto-terrestrial thing is he attached the name to it, although somebody else came up with it. But it's not new to him. The idea that we're sharing the planet with some form of other civilization has been propagated by crazy people, and I use the term specifically to mean crazy people, and also some not-so-crazy people for a very long time now. And you could point to things like Atlantis as being perhaps that advanced civilization that fell, and maybe there are remnants hidden within our own, we came after them, that idea.
Yep.
Bad example. Vampires. The legend that there are these other beings that we have attributed a supernatural kind of aspect to, vampires, but maybe if vampires were real, maybe what they are is just this other non-human civilization that is close enough to pass as us in some circumstances, and on and on. You can go on and on about all that stuff. Mac picked up on all those threads, and he said, well, okay, look, let's see if I can come up with an explanation for the UFO phenomenon that weaves all of this in. So it wasn't just the hollow earth stuff. He's been criticized. People say, he's just regurgitating sort of hollow earth stuff from the 50s that Shaver and other genuinely Looney Tune people put out there.
Right.
And no, that's not what Mac's talking about at all. It was much more subtle and nuanced. But at the end of the day, he understood, and I certainly understood that it was, let's call it speculative neo-fiction, because there's no proof. Frankly, if you were to compare it with the UFO hypothesis, or the extraterrestrial hypothesis, or even the extra-dimensional hypothesis, or even time travel, science says that all of those things might be possible. That we've found yet, there's no hard evidence on this planet of such a civilization that has existed before ours, and there probably should be. Now, that doesn't mean it's completely impossible. It just means on the list of hypotheses, you would put that one probably pretty close to the bottom. And, he understood that. But the important thing about his book was not the hypothesis that he came up with, but it was the way that he set out that we should be thinking about the UFO phenomenon. So I read the book, and when I reviewed it, I basically said, look, I don't buy the crypto-terrestrial stuff. However, you should still read the book because it shows how smart people should think about an interesting subject. Open-minded, take a look at what everybody else is writing. Don't be afraid to look at some stuff that other, terribly serious nuts and bolts ufologists would tell you is probably craziness and these people are kooky. Take a look at it. And over the last 2 years since he passed away, I've started to do that myself. I realized that I was going around criticizing criticizing some people for seeming a bit out there and everything, and I think most of them probably are either liars, frauds, or nuts. But within the group of people that I would have said are liars, frauds, and nuts, I'm willing to at least look into it more closely now and say, you know what, maybe some of them aren't. Maybe some of them sound crazy, or they sound like that. They have to be lying because that can't possibly be true. But wait a minute now. If we're talking about something that's genuinely weird, maybe it's going to sound like it's genuinely weird. So there might be something to this. And I think that idea of shaking things up, which he wanted to do, he said, look, the whole thing about UFOs has become terribly moribund. There's nothing happening. There's nothing new. It's just the same old narrative repeated for the last 30 or 40 years. Aliens from outer space. And Mac would always say, look, it might be that. But you know what? Let's think about all the other things that it might be, too. And let's try and bring some of the gee whiz, wow factor back into this, because it shouldn't be this petty bickering between old men who are just defending their pseudo-intellectual turf that they built up over the last 40 years. Why aren't kids, young people, interested in UFOs the way they used to be? Because they're not. You go to conferences and you'll see, like, everybody at a conference is probably over 50, with very few exceptions. A lot of them now, they're over 60. Membership is down. There's fewer sales of UFO-related books and all that sort of stuff. And yes, there's the internet forums, and that's taken a bit of it. But the truth is, why would you, if you're 21 or 22 years old, why would you be interested in UFOs? Because what is out there, what you've been told, doesn't sound very interesting. There's no sort of wondrous magic and mystery to it. It's just a bunch of old people telling you, here's what you need to believe because this is the truth. Or, on the other hand, it's a bunch of old people telling you, here's what you need to disbelieve because this is all crap.
Yeah.
There's very few people in the middle who are saying, hey, we don't know, but this is cool and mysterious, and you should be interested in it because it's something that's cool and mysterious, but if you ask the right questions and you take the right journey, you might actually learn something about yourself and our world around us, and just think about the possibilities of what this might mean. And we're not saying that you should spend your whole life looking into this, but on that list of things you have to do today, you might want to sort of say, well, maybe I won't watch that third hockey game tonight. Instead, maybe I'll take a look into the UFO phenomenon and think about what that might mean.
Right.
And so, and there's been an abject failure by ufology, quote, quote, whatever that is, to tie the UFO phenomenon, to link it to science. So, they talk about aliens from outer space coming here, or even extra-dimensionals. It doesn't matter, whatever your theory is. But you know what? They don't link it to our real world and to our own scientific advancements. They even go so far as to say, look, the aliens crashed, and everything that we've developed since 1947 has been because we reverse-engineered alien technology, which I think is complete bunk. Instead, what they should be saying is, aliens might be out there. Let's think about what they would look like. Let's try and imagine our own path, our exponential path of technological development. And some of that was Mac getting into the idea of a post-human future where maybe we merge with technology. So if the aliens really are 1,000 years in advance of us, let's imagine what we're going to look like in 1,000 years. Will we still look like we do now? Literally. I mean, look like it. Or will we be cyborgs or artificial intelligence, whatever. And then let's assume that maybe we would have merged with machine intelligence. Well, okay, they probably did too, which means maybe we're dealing with a machine intelligence, which means, if there seems to be some sort of trouble communicating with it, well, that's because we're not the same. They're not flesh and blood creatures like us. They're some form of artificial intelligence. That's a totally different type of intelligence. I'm not saying that's what it is or what it isn't. What I am saying is that's one interesting possibility that I think young people today would understand if you phrased it to them in the proper way, because it's relevant to their own life. You can say UFOs might, let's imagine what they could be, and then let's say this could be us in 100 years or 500 or 1,000 years. And I think everybody's interested in how their own future is going to develop. And I think UFOs, that's one area where they potentially have something to tell us about that.
Yeah, you bring up a lot of valid points. This whole idea of an extraterrestrial intelligence possibly being some form of advanced biological computer reminds me of Nigel Kerner's work, where he talks about extraterrestrials on this mission to harvest souls. Them being some kind of super advanced biological computer that is searching for some sort of form or essence of themselves. And you're right, I think that there are a lot of eggs put in that basket that ETs are from outer space and a story, right? Because, if you look around, Occam's razor would suggest that that's the case. We don't see evidence, like you said, for the most part, other than, incredibly ancient structures that we can't seem to explain away very easily in the archaeological record. There isn't much evidence of a civilization kind of coexisting with us or living underground. So the first thing you're going to insinuate or theorize is that these things are coming from outer space. But what I've been noticing lately, just through talking with other people and investigators and lecturers, and not necessarily young people, but there seems to be an emerging kind of form of thought coming out, with the advent of with the emergence of quantum physics becoming more mainstream and social media being so accessible, that doors of possibility, ranges of human thought and contemporary thought seem to be widening. And that's what I seem to think is the integral important part about Mac's work. You're right. He was basically a punk rock ufologist, if I can say that, because, he shook me up. I was looking to outer space too, and then I kind of, I'd always thought of the interdimensional thing, but when you wrote this book about cryptoterrestrials and I started to turn the wheels in that direction, it started getting me thinking about a whole other realm of possibilities, and I think that's the key point to his work. It's interesting that you guys were so close.
Yeah, well, you mentioned punk rock ufologists, and when I wrote my review, I kind of compared, of the cryptoterrestrials, I compared them to the Sex Pistols. That idea that every now and then, within just the limited area of popular music, something has to come along and shake it up. So if you look at the Sex Pistols, most punk rock in general, musically, it's not Mozart. These people are not Bach.